All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order. If you would please rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome everybody to the September work session. Mrs. Sugars, would you take roll, please?
Mr. Goodwin.
Here.
Mrs. Judge.
Here.
Mrs. Matlack.
Here.
Mrs. Seidel.
Here.
Mrs. Scarfolino.
Here.
Mrs. Schultz.
Here.
Mr. Tomlinson.
Here.
Dr. Wong.
Here.
Dr. Dickinson.
Here. At this time, we'll have our first public discussion. Your comments must be regarding items on the work session agenda. When you come to the mic, please state your name and address. You will have 3 minutes for your remarks. Please note the green light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining. The light will turn red when your 3 minutes are up. No takers? Okay, very good. Turn the mic over to Dr. Milosh for our presentation for this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. We're very pleased this evening to welcome Ms. Christy Morella, who is a social studies humanities teacher at Rosa Middle School, with some of the team members from the National History Day competition from this past spring. So I'm going to ask Ms. Morella to come up to the microphone and to introduce the students, and then they're going to introduce the project that they did, and then we will honor the kids and Mrs. Morella afterwards.
Can't see an NHD or not give them a hug. So thank you so much. This is such I'm a little overwhelmed, and my parents are watching via cast, so I'm a little nervous too. But thank you so much for honoring us this evening. It is awe-inspiring to stand in front of you, but what's more awe-inspiring is to stand in front of my historians. They did something that not many people do in their historical career, which is not only put a documentary together, but discover information that was not known about our local hero, Josiah Du Bois. If I'm familiar with him, and I won't give away too much of the documentary, he deserves to be placed into the annals of history, and because of the 4 young historians that did their project on them, I think we are well on our way to put his name back into the history books. But as I know I'm supposed to keep it brief, I do want to say one thing. When you say the word yes, you never know what will come from it. A couple years ago, my husband and I got a chance to see Tim Cook speak at George Washington University's graduation commencement speaking. And he said, you know, the big thing about Apple is we always say yes. Yeah, you want to try that? Sure, go for it. So when these 4 young historians asked me if they could do a project on Josiah Du Bois, of course, I was like, yes, of course. And every time that they came up with a theory or some sort of question, I never said anything but yes. And here's where it took us. After about 2,000 hours of work, almost 1,000 views on YouTube, a silver medal, and they will be presenting all over the country this next 4 months about their documentary. We have a documentary that honors our local hero, such an important thing, because Cherry Hill has so many individuals that have contributed not only to history but to our community as well. And for that, I want to thank Sam Bittman and Sheena Hertzfeld. Their 2 partners are on their way, Gabby O'Brien and Asha Mohapatra, for their not only hard work, but their commitment to doing exactly what we call him, Josiah Du Bois did, and telling the truth. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, you're going to watch our 10-minute documentary, The Statement That Revealed the Truth, Josiah Du Bois, an American Holocaust Hero.
For all its villains and victims, the history of the Holocaust also has its share of heroes. There is no question that heroes come in different varieties: soldiers who distinguish themselves on the battlefield, or political leaders who rise up and inspire a nation. There were some Americans that stood up against the despotism of the Nazi regime by organizing the escape of Jewish refugees in Europe. Yet this is the story of a different type of hero, one that was not a rescuer or shelterer, Rather, this is the story of a whistleblower. A man who took a stand against the isolationist policy of the American government, and in doing so, secured the rescue of hundreds of thousands of lives. A Treasury agent that risked his life and career to not only take a stand, but to humanize a world that was darkened by oppression. One risk, one stand, one chance. Josiah Du Bois, an American Holocaust hero.
The instability created in Europe by the First World War set the stage for another intercontinental stand. Rising to power in an economically unstable Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party signed strategic treaties with Italy and Japan to further Hitler's ambitions of world dominance. With the invasion of Poland in September of 1939, Hitler revealed more than just his defensive war campaign. German authorities began exploiting Jews in Poland by forcing them into walled ghettos, exposing a greater and more insidious plan. The final solution. The Nazis assigned very high priority to the annihilation of European Jewry. In executing this stand against humanity, the Nazis were willing to weaken their capacity to fight in the war. The United States and its allies, however, did nothing to save the Jews. Hitler's advancement did not stimulate an aggressive American stand. Rather, America's stand against Hitler's aggression seemed non-existent, with the United States restricting immigration by keeping all but a handful of Jews out of America. Believing that national security was at stake, Assistant Secretary of State Breckinridge Long ordered the government to put every obstacle in the way and postpone the granting of visas. This bureaucratic maze of paper walls not only shut America's doors, but is what Josiah Du Bois walked into when he joined the Treasury Department. President Franklin D. Roosevelt had no desire to challenge Long's policies or to question the security argument. President Roosevelt made no promises to take a stand and save the Jews over winning the war, as he was acutely aware of the nativist sentiments that were entrenched within the State Department. His lack of action spoke louder than his words to the public. In August of 1942, the State Department first learned that the anti-Semitic atrocities were not random acts of violence, rather part of a systematic Nazi plan to eradicate all European Jews. Stephen Wise, an American rabbi, was educated by the British of Hitler's plans of annihilation. Standing for the Jewish community, Wise confronted President Roosevelt, stating, "We appeal to you, as head of our government, to do all in your power to make an effort to stop it." As American and British immigration restrictions increased, the British government proposed to the U.S. State Department that the Allied countries hold a conference in Bermuda to discuss whether some of the refugees who had reached neutral countries could be evacuated to safe havens. Yet the Foreign Office had one fear. Their plan to rescue Jews might be too successful. In a memo, the Foreign Office pointed out there was a possibility that the Germans may change over from the policy of extermination to one of extrusion, and aim the war at embarrassing other countries by flooding them with alien immigrants. Reluctant to take a stand after the Bermuda Conference, America was met with mass demonstrations from the Jewish community. The Bergson Group hoped to force the United States to rescue Jews from the Nazis by sending money to European Jews. However, sending money to a war zone required a license from the government. Treasury quickly approved the license and sent it to the State Department. The state's indolence prompted Du Bois's curiosity. Soon entrenched in investigating, Josiah Du Bois was approached by Bernard Meltzer, a State Department official appalled by his department's handling of the refugee issue. Meltzer provided Du Bois with details on state's efforts to block rescue initiatives.
So we had this friend, his name was Donald Hiss. And so we asked Hiss to see if he could secretly find out what was going on. Could he get documents? Could he ask around in a way that wouldn't reveal that Du Bois was asking around?
While searching, Hiss uncovered a key set of telegrams that he quickly delivered to Du Bois and warned him that, if he and Hiss were to be caught, it would destroy their careers. Not fazed by the risk of losing their jobs, Josiah Du Bois read the first telegram sent from the World Jewish Congress on January 21st, 1943, Telegram 482. The telegram sent to the State Department reports of the mass executions in Europe and that 6,000 are killed daily. The telegram acted as a cry for help in Europe, one that President Roosevelt turned a blind eye to.
Roosevelt really wasn't concerned about the Holocaust. He said he was going to try to
This telegram was suppressed by the State Department as they feared public pressure. The department finally responded on February 10, 1943, sending telegram 354 in return. This telegram informed the diplomats to discontinue sending any information on the Holocaust or the refugees unless under extraordinary circumstances. Josiah Du Bois decided to go to the Secretary of the Treasury, Henry Morgenthau Jr., for support. However, Du Bois knew that it would be difficult to persuade Secretary Morgenthau because of his close relationship with President Roosevelt. Using his strategic thinking, it was Du Bois' suggestion that Secretary Morgenthau ask for copies of the relevant telegrams, and in return was given a false version. Secretary Morgenthau's telegrams did not show that it was a response, and it seemed like a neutral dialogue between countries. However, Josiah Du Bois presented Secretary Morgenthau the original telegrams and laid out the road for confrontation with the president. On Christmas Day, 1943, Josiah Du Bois composed an 18-page report titled Report to the Secretary on the Acquiescence of This Government in the Murder of the Jews. Du Bois would confront President Roosevelt and address that the State Department, which is charged with carrying out this policy, has been guilty not only of gross procrastination and willful failure to act, but even of willful attempts to prevent action from being taken to rescue Jews from Hitler. Josiah Du Bois' efforts to expose the State Department's malfeasance culminated in a meeting with President Roosevelt on January 16, 1944. Secretary Morgenthau and fellow Treasury officials presented the President with Josiah Du Bois' report, urging him to create a new board to help refugees. This meeting was vital to Josiah Du Bois, yet he was not present in the room. Du Bois threatened that if President Roosevelt did not take action, he would resign and release the report to the press. President Roosevelt's fear of this report reaching the public helped convince him to take action. On January 22, 1944, Du Bois' stand took full effect. President Roosevelt signed an executive order establishing the War Refugee Board. The War Refugee Board's primary goal was to rescue, transport, and house immigrants in need of saving to America. Despite receiving little government funding, Du Bois advanced his cause of rescue through unorthodox methods. His pressures to the board in sending money to diplomat Raoul Wallenberg helped end the Hungarian deportations, and Wallenberg was able to save 120,000 Jews in Budapest.
Was arranging for transfers. There was plenty of Jewish money in America to save Jews, but the State Department kept blocking transfers of funds, which had to have their approval to Wallenberg. But Du Bois found other ways to get money to him to save Jews.
Du Bois even convinced members of the board to persuade President Roosevelt to establish refugee shelters in the United States. But President Roosevelt agreed to just one shelter for 982 refugees in Oswego, New York. Due to Du Bois' dynamic stand, in 1946, the Truman administration asked Du Bois to head the prosecution in one of the Nuremberg trials, the case of IG Farben, the German chemical manufacturing company, a main supplier of poisonous gas in death camps. Du Bois was able to prosecute 13 criminals at the trials that were all put behind bars.
He was afraid that history would repeat itself. He was afraid of that. He died.
The term whistleblower has assumed a negative connotation in recent years, associated of late with those who put others' lives at risk by exposing secrets. Josiah Du Bois did just the opposite. He risked everything for these people because it was what he believed was right. He had a moral obligation to help other human beings. Because Josiah Du Bois spoke, millions of people were able to tell their stories. It's time we know the story of this ordinary man who did an extraordinary thing.
Piece of work was presented by Sam Bittman. Come on up. And Shana Hirschfeld. And our other two
Good work, everybody.
Great work. Great job.
Thank you, Mr. Guy. All right, so we'll move on to our special action agenda. And Mrs. Seidel, would you move the C&I agenda, please?
I sure will, although that's a hard act to follow. The superintendent recommends and I move the following. Number 1, approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2017-2018 school year. Number 2, resolution approving professional service agreement for the 2017-2018 school year. Number 3, approval of out-of-district student placements for 2017-2018. Number 4, approval of services contract with New Jersey Commission for the Blind and Visually Impaired, 2017-2018. Number 5, approval of special education tuition student. May I have a second? Mr. Goodwin, any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Seidel.
Yes to all.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes.
Mrs. Judge.
Yes to all.
Mrs. Matlack.
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino.
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz.
Yes to all.
Mr. Tomlinson.
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes to all. Mr. Goodwin, would you move the B&F agenda, please?
Yes, I will. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following: approval of bill list. Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack. Sorry. Any questions? If not, Mrs. Sugars.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes.
Mrs. Judge.
I need to abstain regarding the Cooper Health System on the bill list. Yes to the rest.
Mrs. Matlack.
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel.
Abstain with respect to CDW on the bill list. Yes to the rest.
Mrs. Scarpolino.
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz.
Abstain from Beata Home Health. Yes to the rest.
Mr. Tomlinson.
Abstain from Bancroft Neurohealth. Yes to the remainder.
Dr. Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes. Mrs. Judge, would you move the HR agenda, please?
Yes, I will. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, termination of employment certificated. Number 2, termination of employment non-certificated. Number 3, appointment certificated. Number 4, appointments non-certificated. Number 5, assignment, assignment salary change certificated. Number 6, assignment salary change non-certificated. Number 7, other compensation certificated. Number 8, other compensation non-certificated. Number 9, other motions. And number 10, other motions. And I do want to point out we have a pink sheet addendum to numbers 3, 4, and 6. Do I have a second? Mrs. Scarpolino. Any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Mrs. Judge.
Yes to all.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack.
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel.
Yes.
Mrs. Scarpolino.
Yes to all.
Mrs. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson.
Yes to all.
Dr. Wong.
I need to abstaining to appointments certificated F and G. Yes to all. Yeah, yes to the rest.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes to all. Before we move into P&L, I want to turn the mic over to Dr. Malash.
Thank you, Dr. Dickinson. It gives me great pleasure to reintroduce to somebody, but introduce to everybody, Mr. Bernie O'Connor. Bernie, if you would walk up to the podium. You all just approved Mr. O'Connor to become the interim principal at Beck Middle School beginning on Monday, October the 2nd. It's my great pleasure to bring Mr. O'Connor forward to the board, and I'm thrilled that the board just approved his appointment. As you're all aware, Mr. Dawson, who joined the district last year as the principal at Beck, has been accepted a position back in his former district, North Brunswick. So I'm thrilled that Mr. O'Connor will go over and take over the helm of Beck Middle School. Bernie joined the district in September of 1996. And came to us following a stint in a career as a police officer in Philadelphia before he went back into education. He has spent the last 9 years, he just began his 10th year as an assistant principal at High School East. Bernie and I originally met when we worked together at High School West when he was teaching history, all kinds of history classes, including the AP Economics class. and he did his administrative internship with me during some interesting times that we still talk about. So I'm absolutely thrilled that Bernie was appointed. It's my pleasure to introduce him to all of you, and I look forward to hearing and seeing what goes on over the course of the next year.
Thank you, Dr. Malash. To the members of the Board of Education, thank you very much for your trust in me and pointing me there. Thank Dr. Campisi, Mrs. Adrian, for their support in all of this. Dr. Malash just took everything that I was going to say, give it a little bit. So, but I'm really looking forward to, like Dr. Malash said, the last 9 years I've been at High School East, 12 years before that I was at High School West, and I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to serve the students of the Cherry Hill Public Schools in another capacity. So thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to P&L. Mrs. Scarpellino, would you please move the agenda?
Certainly. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number 1, approval of Cherry Hill Public Schools HIB self-assessments and statements of assurances. May I have a second? Mrs. Seidel. Are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars?
Mrs. Scarpellino.
Yes.
Mr. Goodwin.
Yes.
Mrs. Judge.
Yes.
Mrs. Matlack.
Yes.
Mrs. Seidel.
Yes.
Mrs. Schultz.
Yes.
Mr. Tomlinson.
Yes.
Dr. Wong.
Yes.
Dr. Dickinson.
Yes. Okay, we have no strategic planning items this evening. We'll get you soon. Coming your way. All right, so that concludes our special action agenda. We'll now move to our work session agenda. And Mrs. Seidel, would you start with C&I, please?
I sure will. Our last curriculum and instruction meeting was held on September 5th at 7 p.m. And as usual, we had a packed agenda. First up on the agenda was an update on the world language discussion, and Dr. Mahan provided us with a brief update. She shared questions that will be used in an upcoming world language survey. The questions have been vetted across several stakeholder groups to ensure that the response that we're eliciting, the response elicited provides the data that's needed to make a determination regarding next steps. We can expect a full presentation at the next C&I committee meeting on October 5th. And there was a question from the board to see if computers could be available during back to school night, which would allow an additional avenue for parents to take the survey. Next on the agenda, we talked about theatrical productions and received the packets and scripts for those theatrical production approvals. There were 2 from West and 1 from East. West had a Christmas Carol, A Christmas Carol, the musical. West also had The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and East had The Music Man presented at our meeting. We talked briefly about the PSAT schedule. The date will be October 11th, and we'll follow the same schedule as last year. We can expect a letter from the high school principals in the near future. Am I doing the kindergarten update, or are we gonna save that for the end? Okay, so I will skip over that for a minute. We talked briefly about updated graduation requirements, particularly the high school graduation assessment requirements for PARC for classes 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, and beyond. And those updated assessment requirements have been posted on our website, and I believe have also been discussed at freshman orientation and will be discussed with all impacted classes. We ended with some public comment. The comments were primarily around the world language survey coming up. Some of the speakers thought that we should present a list of world languages, not open-ended questions. And we did have one speaker that commented and hoped that we were thinking about as world language is looked at in more detail, hoping that we were looking at strengthening the program so that kids coming out of 5th grade are more prepared and have a better foundation for a language, and possibly thinking about having consistency among the high schools with the languages that are offered. And the bulk of our conversation was around the full-day kindergarten update. So I'm going to turn that over to Dr. Mahan, who is going to share the presentation that we saw at CNI.
Okay, I'm just checking to make sure my clicker works. So this information or similar information in regards to the educational rationale was presented at the July 11th Committee of the Whole meeting. And then at the September 5th Curriculum and Instruction Committee, I presented similar information that you're going to see tonight. However, after comments made at the CNI committee and discussion at that committee meeting, we changed the format in which the information is going to be shared this evening. So tonight is the next presentation. So I just remind you of our rationale. Why are we looking to move forward with implementing full-day kindergarten here in Cherry Hill? These bullets really highlight our students being able to meet the New Jersey Student Learning Standards, the goal of kindergarten, propelling Cherry Hill to the forefront because we already believe that we are a district that displays academic excellence, and to bolster our current program. So an overview, you asked for what are our full-day kindergarten options, things to consider for full-day kindergarten, and then our program time allocations. How much time do we currently have allocated for each of the academic areas? So this is just a recap of what I said, in that we've met on the 11th, we met again on the 5th. After that meeting on the 5th, we decided to change the bulleted items that we shared with the CNI committee so that they were clustered under specific categories, including facilities, staffing, transportation, curriculum, and general concerns. So the kindergarten options that we have decided to move forward on are: 1, full-day kindergarten center, full-day kindergarten housed in neighborhood schools, and then full-day kindergarten housed in neighborhood schools with modulars. So if we were to consider implementation of a full-day kindergarten center, some of the things that we would need to consider under the facilities area are making sure that we have outfitted all of the classrooms with proper restrooms. This configuration would need for us to change how we currently serve our students, so that we would need 2 of our current buildings in order to have kindergarten centers, which would leave 10 remaining 1st through 5th grade buildings. In staffing, we would need approximately 15 additional regular education kindergarten teachers, additional special education teachers, encore staff, and child study team members. Under transportation and curriculum, the elimination of kindergarten-specific early dismissal days. And at the CNI meeting, I was asked to provide specific information if I use the term elimination. So you will see the note at the bottom of the slide, and this will be consistent across all of the slides when you see the term elimination. So just for further clarification, we currently have, on early dismissal days for kindergarten students, we have a split kindergarten dismissal day. So our AM students come in from 9 to 10:30, PM students come in from 11 to 1, 10:30 to 1, and it means that we have an additional bus route in the morning for kindergarten students, and then we still have a bus route at 1 o'clock. So that is what that note at the bottom is explaining to you. And then you see information about establishing kindergarten-specific bus routes, but we would eliminate, again, the midday bus routes. Curriculum, we would need to consider the possibility of adding an ESL bilingual class, enrichment and intervention offerings for kindergarten students, which we currently offer in grades 1st through 5th, equipment and supplies, and then time allocated for each subject area. And then general concerns, loss of neighborhood schools. This would add an additional transition for students. We would not need EDCC to be required. And then the impact on the school-age child care program. And then food services. So if we were to offer full-day kindergarten housed in our neighborhood schools, again, we clustered everything under the same headings. So facilities, again, making sure that our buildings are outfitted with proper restrooms in all of the kindergarten rooms. We would need equity across all 12 of our elementary schools for the areas listed. Those are encore areas and then specialists that come into the buildings to support our students. Salary and benefits, which you saw on the last proposal for a kindergarten center, approximately 15 additional regular education teachers, additional special education staff, and then additional encore staff. For transportation, again, the elimination of the case-specific schedule, busing, and then the possible increase of bus routes. And then at the bottom, and I did not forget, I'll just tell you, the note is on the next slide because it was too long. So I'll go through it and then I'll highlight. So the elimination of kindergarten-specific early dismissal days, as we've already discussed, the possible increase of bus routes, and then under the curriculum, which encore classes would be offered at the homeschool if we were to have full-day kindergarten, the elimination of kindergarten enrichment, the elimination of ESL kindergarten at our magnet schools, equipment and supplies, intervention and enrichment for our kindergarten students, which I've already mentioned is currently offered to students in grades 1st through 5th, and then time allocated for each subject area. So again, the term elimination was used. I've already gone over the first bullet, which eliminates the half-day busing on half days or early dismissal days for kindergarten students or all students. And the second bullet speaks to elimination of kindergarten enrichment and ESL kindergarten. So we currently offer at our Title I schools a full-day kindergarten program for approximately 15 students in the building. So the students who are the most academically needy currently do receive a full-day program. If we were to offer full-day kindergarten, this program will be eliminated because all students would be afforded the opportunity for a full-day program. And the second is for ESL kindergarten. We currently offer our students who receive English as a second language services a full-day kindergarten program if they are eligible. So they attend a regular kindergarten class in the morning, and then they receive an ESL specific kindergarten class in the PM and or AM, opposite of their regular AM kindergarten or regular kindergarten class. So both of those would be eliminated because ESL services at the elementary school for kindergarten would be embedded in the academic day. They would be either push in or pull out, which is in line with our current model. So general things to consider. There would be a connection to the neighborhood schools, fewer transitions for students. It would be aligned with our current transitions at grade 5 and grade 8. No extended day childcare would be required. We would need to consider the impact on enrollment in school-age childcare, which offers our before and after school programs. Our enrollment numbers, we would need to look historically at students who are not enrolling in our current kindergarten because it's half day and who do enroll in Cherry Hill Public Schools when they are in first grade. So we would need to think about those numbers. Food services, if we're able to accommodate, and then the master schedule to accommodate lunch and recess for entire school population. So the final option is full day kindergarten housed in neighborhood schools with modulars. I was asked to make sure that we highlighted that this is definitely a temporary solution. This is not something that we are looking to have long term if we were to have modulars. So in addition to what you've already seen for this option, under facilities, the cost of the modulars, the safety and security for modular locations, and then how our current classroom space is utilized, who would actually be placed in the modulars we would need to consider. The salary and staff and Encore staff is again the same as you've seen across the other options. The elimination of kindergarten specific early dismissal days. And again, at the bottom, the curriculum, these are the same as you just saw on the previous option. Again, the same. Considerations, also the same, as the students would still be at their home school. We would just be having modulars to account for space issues. So one of the things that we talked about at the CNI meeting on the 5th was program time allocation. So how much time do we currently have allocated to each subject area? So this is a comparison chart just for you to see now how we currently allocate time across the academic areas, our lunch and recess, our intervention and enrichment period, and our encores, which are specials, art, music, PE. So this shows you grades K through 5 and the breakdown for each area. On this slide, you see how we currently break down our half-day program for a total of 150 minutes for our kindergarten students. If we were to move to a full-day program, this is how the times would be allocated to be more in line with what we currently offer for our 1st through 5th grade students. And that's it. Any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Goodwin.
In the first option for the center, was that just an oversight, or would we still have the ESL and Title I?
Yeah, it was not an oversight. If you look under the curriculum tab for the kindergarten center, at the kindergarten center, we would most likely have to offer, and the bullet says possible addition of ESL bilingual classes, because when we have over 20 students in a building who speak the same language, we have to offer our services in a different way. So ESL services would be offered, but there is like a high possibility that we would have to offer a bilingual class. So that's how that's captured there.
Okay.
And then you asked about
Title I?
Title I. With the kindergarten center, the Title I program would be eliminated. So I will make a note of that. Go ahead, Dr. Wong.
You have presented 3 options, so I think my question is, how should we move forward with that? I mean, are we going to survey the community to get their feedback, or once the feedback is collected, then what we're going to decide on? I mean, we can only do one option, right? So that's mainly my curiosity. Thank you.
So I was just going to say, we are looking to have a recommendation or a decision, I guess, from the board to decide which option we are going to explore further and move forward with, so that we are targeting our efforts to a specific area. So there are 3 different options, and we're looking for, I guess, some direction. Go ahead, Ms. Matlack.
The 2 options of the neighborhood schools, I'm assuming that that's dependent upon whether there's enough room in the elementary schools.
Yes.
Or in all of our elementary schools. So I guess my question would be, is there enough room in each of our elementary schools? to do this? And if there's not, which schools do not have enough room and would require the temporary modules? And if that is positive, then subsequent question would be then, what's the long-term plan for the modulars? How long would they be in place? And what's needed in order to make a permanent addition to the buildings?
So it is our expectation that we are not going to have modulars for an extended period of time, as you've already said, but we are just waiting to explore all of our options. We did start to look at the designated classrooms in the building, so the art room, the music room, the speech room, the literacy teacher coach room, if every building has a stage, to make sure that there's equity across all of the buildings. And we are almost done compiling that data to just confirm our thoughts in that we do have appropriate space in all of our buildings. And if we do not, what are going to be the changes that we need to make to be compliant based on QSAC with all of the restrooms, and or to need to add modulars at buildings, which is a temporary solution. But there's definitely work that we will need to do in some locations. Go ahead.
Another question. I know these are the three choices, so if I can't get a fourth choice, that's fine. But I guess I was just wondering if there was a way we could work with the township and look at a third option of finding a different space, like a space that we could renovate to make it a kindergarten center, or the possibility of maybe building that kindergarten center. I don't know if that's a possibility out there, but it seems like that would kind of eliminate the issue around the neighborhood schools issue, as well as be able to address being able to provide that full-day kindergarten.
So some of that, Mr. Grubin, honestly would fit in underneath the kindergarten center option, right? And that's the way that, as Dr. Mahan put it up, there was kindergarten centers or centers. Could be one facility or multiple facilities. The way that we had talked about it in district was using two of our existing schools. To pursue that, to build a site, that certainly could be part of it. If the board said, listen, we think that all the kindergartners in the district should go to the same school at the same time, then that certainly we can pursue that option. As Dr. Mahan talked about all the different spaces that we look at, so it also is tied in with the finalization of the long-range facilities plan, and that kind of piece to go forward. Looking at those three pieces, and Dr. Mahan did a very nice job, I thought, of explaining. The modular piece is if we were going to implement and ready to go, and that was the direction. Modular is a temporary piece, right? Either a short-term temporary until we build, or until we add something on, or temporary because there's a spike in enrollment.
At our CNI meeting, I had asked for, I had suggested pretty much the same thing back in August, I guess it was, when we did this. And I said, what about using the Barclay School, which is our early childhood center right now, making that one kindergarten center. And Dr. Mahan came back and followed up on that and explained how cost prohibitive that would be, along with all of our needs that we're looking at improving for the rest of the district. So as much as I was excited about that idea for new construction, and housing all of our preschool and kindergarten students all together, after speaking with her, I realized that is probably out of our realm right now, but if the rest of the board feels that is something that we should look at, we can certainly proceed with looking at that. But given what she said to me, I was willing to give up that idea for now. So I just thought I'd share that with you, and maybe Dr. Mahan can add anything to it if you have any more questions.
I guess I don't know what the expectations are for tonight, but it's kind of hard to say which direction we want to go in, or say which choice we want to go down. We don't have even a ballpark figure for what these would cost. I mean, are there some kind of ballpark figures that are assigned in terms of costs, along with, I see the pros and the cons, but I don't see dollars and cents.
There really aren't at this point, and to give you numbers while we sit here tonight would just be hypotheticals that I don't know that would serve any of us in a beneficial manner. As we've gone through with the discussion, it's, from the board perspective about ideally what is it that we believe about kindergarten and full day kindergarten, and what is it we think is going to be best, right? So then the money is going to be the next piece that comes through. And not to put the cart before the horse, is again, the ideal that we talk about is educating the kids. There's going to be a cost associated with anything that we do transitioning from a half-day kindergarten for a full-day kindergarten. There's going to be physical work that's going to need to occur in buildings, or building a new building, whatever it is, right? There are pieces that are going to go along with that, and then there are staffing implications. There's relative consistency with staffing implications just based on the numbers with where we are. And again, we benefit from the fact Dr. Mahan, Mr. Bart, and the folks in registration, Ms. Sadwin, and those people looking at the trends with where we've been historically with our enrollment year in and year out at each of the elementary schools, transition between kindergarten enrollment to first grade enrollment, where we see spikes, and we know that there are spikes in certain communities or certain neighborhoods, but that's a piece of it to go through. We can look at some hypothetical numbers to start to get down into the real deep into the weeds of it. Is going to be a significant investment of time, that, bless you, to have our facilities folks and then the folks that we work with through Bessica and through Mrs. Sugar's office to do that. We can start to move that forward. It's just that we have not done that at this point with where we are. Again, with the idea of coming with the board and talking, what direction do we want to go in, to decide.
Jane?
I guess I'm not really understanding the distinction between option 2 and 3. I mean, 3 just seems to be option 2 delayed, or while we're waiting to do option 2. So I don't really see this as 3 options unless I'm missing something. I see it as 2, and I'm assuming when we say modulars, we're talking about trailers?
Yes.
Okay, and do we know, are we buying these trailers? Are we renting these trailers? How are they gonna, how's this all gonna work if we're only gonna be using them temporarily? And it doesn't sound like we even have a sense of how temporary is going to be. So I'd like a little clarification as to how these are actually 2 different options.
Do you want to respond?
I might be able to add a little clarification on the difference between 2 and 3, because we talked a little bit about this at CNI, and tell me if I have this correct, Dr. Mahan. Mm-hmm. So with the modular option, I believe the elementary schools would stay pretty much intact as they are today. If there's room in the building for kindergarten, great, there wouldn't be a modular. If there's not room in the building as it exists today, there would be a modular. In option 2, we have an opportunity to put full-day kindergarten in each elementary building, but also to create some consistency across the schools. So if elementary school A has a music room today, a dedicated music room, but elementary school B does not have a dedicated music room, we will reallocate the spaces to make room for kindergarten and create equity across the remaining schools. So just an example, perhaps the schools would no longer have a dedicated music room across all of the elementary schools, and they'd all have cart service. Or they wouldn't have a computer lab and they would have cart service. So I think that's the difference between the 2 options that we discussed. Yep.
So if I'm understanding this, then equity could result in taking away some options from schools, as opposed to one option, one school has a music room, the other school has a room for kindergarten already. So when we're going to build a kindergarten room here and a music room here, we're going to take away a music room from everybody. Is that what we're talking about?
I think that's, I wouldn't necessarily say it that way, but I guess the short answer to your question is yes. There isn't room to do both in every school. So this would give us an opportunity to sort of standardize how we're offering things at each school. It doesn't mean that we won't offer, for example, music, but right now, for example, and I don't think we know this, we don't have the little grid yet, because I know you're still in the process of doing it, you know, like elementary school has this, this, and this, elementary B has this, this, and this. But it does allow us to sort of create the same experience at all of the elementary schools. And so, I mean, I'll just sort of throw it out there. For me, that's my top option. If I had to rank the three, that's the housing it within the schools and sort of balancing out how our elementary schools look. To me, that's a win-win.
Thank you, Ms. Seidel. Mr. Judd?
So I have a couple questions. So one of my questions was, is the second example realistic? But now I kind of have it clear. So it wouldn't be modulars at every building if not needed. And had we thought of using the modules for an older grade, or are we just assuming that all modulars are going to house kindergarten?
No, we actually did consider for an older grade. We didn't think it would be appropriate for our kindergarten students.
And are we certain that this is a moot point when we go to full day, but is AM kindergarten on a early dismissal really 9 to 10:30 and PM kindergarten from 10:30 to 1? Because that's 1.5 hours for AM and 2.5 hours for the PM class. It's a moot point when we go to full day. So, but it just struck me, and I'm not usually very good with math.
No,
so
I could have.
We'll go back and check.
It's
okay.
It's 9 to 11:30.
9 to 11:30, and they
PM
overlap.
comes 10:30 to 1, and there's an hour overlap in the middle of the
that's
day.
Right.
I apologize.
No, that's okay. That's what I remembered when years ago. So, two other questions is 75 minutes a day for full day kindergarten normal? Because that seems like an awful lot of math, and I know you can make it fun, but that does seem long for a kindergartner. Is that normal for? Is that what's expected?
That is normal. Yes.
Wow. Okay.
And if you go back, I can pull it back up.
I think it's 15 minutes.
If we go back to the chart, you'll see that
it's
is really
30.
in line, with what we have. If you look at the first grade numbers, what we're proposing is really in line with the expectations for first grade. And I can tell you, as the mom of a current full-day kindergarten student, his day looks very similar to this.
Okay.
One of the other pieces, Mrs. Judge, with it too is 75 minutes of math in kindergarten or first grade as it goes through does not look like 75 minutes of math that Gay and Josh are experiencing, at the high school. They are blocks of time.
Thank
but it's,
goodness.
What's going on in the activities. In fact, I would tell you, I wish that what they're experiencing looked more like what these kids are experiencing at that level in terms of the interaction and what goes on in the classroom. But they are parameters time-wise.
Yeah, it's much more exploratory and hands-on, manipulative based, a lot of games.
Yeah, that's what I remember. And then my last question is, and this is the cart before the horse, but have we thought of, if we do full-day kindergarten and we delete the Title I need, what will we do with that money? Have we thought of that?
So I was going to say that the kindergarten Title I program is not funded through Title I.
It's not.
It's funded out of our general fund. It was removed from the Title I budget many years ago and has been funded through the general budget for at least 10 years, maybe.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I made a huge assumption. Okay.
We
All right.
refer to it because it occurs in the Title I enrichment occurs in the Title I schools, but we do not use the funding, as Farrah talked about, from the federal grant. It's district funded.
This might be a little bit of a loaded question, so I'm sorry for that.
Okay.
But
I'll try to respond.
on option two, how confident are we that we aren't going to outgrow option two from a space perspective, and are we just going to be revisiting kindergarten centers anyway in a couple years?
So, yes, we are. Not yes. We are not. We don't know. So we look at the numbers across from the curriculum office, with the registration office, in regards to how many students are we seeing enrolling in first grade across the district, because those are numbers that we have to consider. We also have to consider, if we do start to provide full day K, are more families going to now come to Cherry Hill, and what will that look like? On average, we see about 100 students who enter the district in first grade who were not students here in kindergarten. So that is dispersed across all 12 schools. So we may not see a bulge in one building, but if we see a bulge in other buildings, that is one of the things that we are looking at now, because we have some schools that will be able to house, full day K, possibly for the 17 or the 18-19 school year. However, if they see an increase in enrollment, we could be looking at an issue and not having enough classroom space. So, and just to add, there has been conversations about full day kindergarten for quite a few years in the district, and some of the trends that we are seeing are trends that we actually saw. What was that report? It was a report done about 15 years ago.
2001.
And it's, and it's almost identical to the data that we are currently gathering in regards to enrollment and trends and space. So, go ahead, Josh.
If the board ultimately moves forward with the kindergarten center option, what factors would be used to determine which neighborhood schools would be converted into kindergarten centers, and how would these factors be judged?
I'm going to pass that one to Dr. Malash.
It's a good question, Josh.
It's a great question.
There are a couple of them. If we were to use existing schools, right, we would do two of them, one on the east side of town and one on the west side of town. So some of it would be based upon where their location is. Ease of accessibility for transportation for buses to get on campus and to get off of the campus. Another factor that would go in would be the current infrastructure of the building. How is it currently set up? What's the piping look like? Where are the bathrooms? Are they in the classroom? Where in the hallways? Those types of things. What do the large group spaces look like? What's the field look like? What type of playground? All those different pieces to go through. But the biggest things would be the infrastructure in the building and accessibility, location in town.
Excellent question. Dr. Dickinson?
To Mrs. Scarpolino's point, I'm sitting here thinking that 2 years ago in my real job, I was actually in a modular building, and before I left it about 2 years ago, I noticed on the wall that it was actually stationed in 1992 as a temporary modular building. Interestingly enough, the certificate of occupancy expired about 3 years thereafter, and it remains there today. And also growing up in Willingboro, the Willingboro School District, they made extensive use of modular buildings in my time there, and I think some of them are still there, some 30 years later. So I personally don't think we should even consider that, because once something is in place, it kind of becomes permanent. And then I guess I'll be the first one to kind of throw my hat in the ring to say, I certainly support neighborhood schools, but it depends. Depends on how much it costs. So.
Mrs. Scarpolino?
Well, not to keep jumping on an option that might not even be considered, but going back to Mr. Goodwin's point, and Ms. Matlack, when you mentioned about whether to make Barclay the kindergarten center and how cost prohibitive that would be, I'm assuming that's because it's an existing building that you're trying to now make into a different type of space. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but was anything looked at about either acquiring land or using land? I don't know if the school board even owns, the district owns land or other land that the township may have to then build something fresh. Sometimes that's a lot cheaper in the long run than it is to try to retrofit existing buildings. And I don't remember exactly when that was, but we had seen this amazing video of the Japanese kindergarten center, which was designed with kindergartens in mind as opposed to kind of shoehorning it to make it fit. So I'm just wondering if that's been explored at all.
We have not explored acquiring land at this point. Well, we have land, right? I mean, we have 19 schools, and some of our elementary schools are sit on large pieces of property, to go through. So, if the will of the board was to pursue that option to construct there are places that could be constructed within the district, but most likely on an existing piece of property, to go. It's not so much even the conversion of Barclay. So Barclay is a running school as it is with preschool handicap, right? So and there are typically developing children that are included as well in that program. South of 300 children that are there. there's not space. Nothing that we can do in that building as it stands proper right now is going to take on 780 more kids, to go in. Nothing that we do in that building, so that would involve a huge construction project, where you would basically be constructing a new building, on that site, if that's what it was going to be. But again, that goes back to, that if that's the identification and the pursuit to go through, that it is a kindergarten center, and to do one, then certainly we can go into, start to get into the weeds a little bit about, what's the cost and what's the impact, to go through.
Malik?
Well, I'll just jump in and follow Dr. Dickinson's lead. Although I really, the idea of a kindergarten center, especially one for the entire district, and especially the vision I had of including the preschoolers with it, really appeals to me. I feel that in my opinion, our best option is the full-day kindergarten housed in our neighborhood schools. I would not be in favor of the modulars because, like Dr. Dickinson said, too many times they're put in schools as a temporary option, and 5, 10, 15 years later, they're still there. They might not be used in the same capacity as when they were originally put, but they're still there. So I would, if everybody else is, wants to pursue the kindergarten option, I'll let you know I still do like that, but my first choice would be to preserve our neighborhood schools and put full-day kindergarten in our schools. And especially, as Mrs. Seidel pointed out, the equity between our neighborhood schools as well, so that we don't have some of the inequities that we have now is very appealing as well.
Follow up. So if we are going to take the second option, then are we talking about adding like buildings, rooms to almost all the 9 elementary schools? So we are going to still somewhat concentrate on, say, 5 of them or 6 of them. So that means it still keep this flavor of neighborhood schools, but on the other hand, saving some money on the cost of remodeling or adding additions to all the schools. So that's, of course, maybe it's still early, but
correct.
Might be a concern. Yeah.
Yes, so we would be looking to make sure that there's consistency across all 12 of the elementary schools, and some of the buildings may need work done, additional classrooms. Some of the buildings may already be able to house the current program or the intended program of full-day kindergarten. So we would have to see as we get deeper into the process.
Can you just remind me again what the bathroom requirements are? It doesn't necessarily have to be in the classroom, right? We can get a waiver if it's a certain number of feet.
If it's adjacent, right? Ms. Sugars, I don't want to speak out of turn. It's in the classroom that they want it, and you can receive a waiver if it is adjacent.
Yes. Thank you.
And just for clarification, because again, as a board, you guys deal with policy and waiver of policy, right? So there are guidelines that we're held to a standard to uphold. If we're going to go through and reconfigure space and do things, my recommendation is always going to be to follow the guidelines that are there. Right. Not that we couldn't, if there was an emergency or if there's issues, as we currently have in some of the buildings, request a waiver. I don't believe that if we're going to implement full-day kindergarten, we're going to make that announcement and do all that stuff and we're going to hope that the state approves a waiver that we don't have to do certain work. So again, just as a perspective piece, right? You guys deal with policy all the time. And I don't believe that any, as Dr. Campisi goes through P&L, we don't typically adopt policies with the idea that we'll just, that when everybody comes to waive it, that we'll go through and do that.
I'm also in favor of the number 2, the second option, but I don't think it's realistic to not have modulars at a couple. That doesn't scare me to have a couple of modulars in the district. I just don't see how, if we're going to say stay in each elementary community, how it's going to come off in 2018. I just don't see it. So I'm in favor of a 2-3.
Okay.
Broad stroke. But it also, you're right. I mean, we'd have to follow the requirements and whatever and cost. But modulars don't scare me. Camden County Education Services Commission has had modulars and they've taken away. Actually, they've had mobile schools where they drive them there, and they've done away with that when they've needed to. So, just a mobile trailer. What?
That's driving schools.
Oh. Yeah. So I don't see how we could do the second option without having, unless you guys. I don't know. I just don't see how realistic it is. There are some buildings we don't have any room, so going into number 3 a little bit doesn't scare me.
So, thank you for your feedback. I guess we will, Dr. Malash and I will craft something to give further direction to me as to what direction you want me to go in, and then I will come back to present again. Thank you.
Was there an administrative recommendation at this time? Are you leaning towards one way or the other?
There is, Dr. Dickinson. Yes, the full-day kindergarten and the neighborhood schools, and making the arrangements and the accommodations and working out what it is that needs to be done in that manner, and talking about what the time frame is. And no, it's definitely not doable for September of 2018. It's just not, probably in any stretch, to go through. But that would be, as we look at everything and we go through and talk about what the options are, I love the concept of new construction as well. It's just I don't believe that that's a feasible option for us as a school district right now in terms of what's going on. But that would be the recommendation that we would provide. Bless you.
Bless you. Thank you. Okay.
Sorry,
You had a
I was going
question?
to say I didn't ask if there were questions on any other topic on the CNI agenda because Mrs. Scarpolino actually whispered a question to me. She asked what the timeline was for the World Language Survey, so I just wanted to make sure that we address that. I think that we were shooting to have the readout at the next CNI meeting, and you wanted to keep it open for 2 weeks, so I would imagine that it's soon.
Yeah, so the World Language Survey, because at the CNI meeting, it was asked that parents have the opportunity to complete the survey at back to school night. We had 2 schools that have already had back to school night. However, Mr. Goldthorpe and I reached out to those building principals. That was Clara Barton and Carusi. So both of those parent groups have been notified of the survey. The survey has been shared with those communities, 6th grade only at Carusi because they haven't had their 7th and 8th grade yet. All of the principals are going to receive the link to the World Language Survey Wednesday at our district leadership team meeting. The survey will be open until September 29th, until September 26th. That will give Mr. Goldthorpe the 27th, 28th, and 29th to analyze the data. And we will be prepared to present the survey results at the October 2nd CNI meeting.
Side down. Another question. Other than back to school night, are there other ways we're getting that information out to the community that those surveys are available? So,
the information is also going to be coming out in our weekly communication blast from Public Information. Mrs. Wilson, we've already been in contact with her. The information is also going to be tweeted out and posted on our website.
Mr. Goodwin.
Along those lines as well. So we're putting out the survey. Is it because we've gotten a lot of different requests for world languages and a lot of different people are asking for different world languages, or why are we having the survey?
So I'm going to give you my answer and then turn it over to Dr. Malash. So I think we have had over the years requests for specific languages from a variety of stakeholders. But the look at the World Language Program is really holistic, looking at the whole program, not just what classes or what languages are being offered. So that's one piece of this look at the World Language Program. But to answer your original question, yes, we have over the years, at least since I've been on the board, received a variety of different requests for things like American Sign Language or Chinese, for example.
And the other piece, Mr. Goodwin, is as part of the overall review of the program, when Dr. Mahan did her presentation back in the spring, she talked about surveying the community as another way to gain information and garner information, just about how people feel, and it's geared, the way the survey is broken down, to students, to family members, and to teachers or community members to go through. But it's another piece of the information. I'm just trying to remind folks that it's not a vote. Like it's not going to come back the survey results, and if the survey says that's not the way that it goes through. It's one piece of the information that'll be included in the overall look at the program, and there have been different languages. So we've had a lot of discussion. There's a great group of folks in the community, the Chinese language group, that has met with a variety of us throughout the district over the last 6 years or so. We've also had requests for American Sign Language, for Hindi, for Arabic, for Gujarati. It being the big ones and Russian that have come through. So
I guess just further, so is the idea that we're going to restructure the program? So right now we offer certain languages. Maybe we might throw out a couple of those languages that we currently offer and add some others in, or are we just looking to add on?
So the simple answer is yes. To both parts of it, honestly. And looking at the program that we offer first grade, through 12th grade. One of the things that we desire, and Dr. Mann will go back and forth with it, as curricularists and as educators, we believe that more kids should take 4 years of world language while they're in high school, regardless of the language that they're taking. The great opportunity to meet with 2 teachers and I think 19 students from Germany last night, are here visiting and staying with families from a high school at East, and even as the teachers go through and contend the school system is dramatically different in terms of how they're organized, but you have kids that are taking 2, 3, 4 languages by the time they're graduating from high school. And looking at the overall world language program that we offer right now, at each of those levels, and looking at high school about what is it that we offer. What are the opportunities that the kids have, and can we do better with where we are? Because, again, we always believe that we can do better in terms of the structure of what we do for the kids. So this is that big picture look. There was a time in the mid-2000s and early 2010s, when because of the federal standards and state standards changing, that all the attention focused specifically on English language arts and mathematics, and every time we revised something, it was time to revise those again. So Dr. Mahan, over the last 18 months or so, really has picked this up. She and Mr. Goldthorpe have really led this work, and I'm really pleased. And I'm looking forward to see what all of their work produces, in the final presentation.
Anyone else? Okay, Dr. Dickinson, back to you.
Sure, there's no more questions about that. Last chance. All right, Mr. Goodwin, would you discuss BNF, please?
Sure. For BNF, we went through a few items. First of all, our new auditors are in place, and they've done an initial review of the books. It looks like we're doing really well as far as budget-wise, and it looks like we're looking to have an additional $1.5 million over and above our in excess fund. So we're looking to let that roll over to our excess surplus. Did I say that right? So we're going to excess surplus so that we'll be able to use it for next year's budget. We we're going down the path of having online meetings, but due to some personnel issues and things like that, in terms of people out sick and those kind of things, we're probably going to roll that back and start looking again in early 2018 to have our official online board meeting. And then also we talked about some of the projects that are going on. We had updates on what's going on in the East Wall project, the Barclays Security Project, which is underway, as well as the Kingston Soffit Project. And also update on the Barton Crawl Space. That's something that we're still put out for a couple of bids. We didn't have any takers. Now we're going to go out and search for a contractor to be able to do that work, and we're still hoping to have that started this year. And that was our major updates. Any questions?
Oh, sorry, online board meeting? I'm not sure what that is.
Well, technically, with the online board meeting, we'll actually have the agenda and be able to take the vote, and it'll all be on this screen right up here where you'll, it'll be, not only will we have our, agendas on our screens here, it'll be up there, and the public will be able to see it online.
So we're not going to have a virtual meeting. We'll actually still be here.
Oh, I guess we could. We could all be home and have our little video screens. No, it's not that. Ms. Matlack.
There's also an online component for the staff to use that they don't currently use now. That would come into play. That is also a lot of preparation for us, and not just our part that we see here.
Any other questions? If not, I'll give it back to Dr. Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwin. Mrs. Judge, would you discuss HR, please?
I will.
Whatever you can.
Yeah. So we had our monthly HR meeting on Wednesday, September 6th, due to the Labor Day holiday on Monday. And most of our discussion is confidential due to personnel matters, but I can report a couple of things. And of course, a couple of things that we discussed at our meeting, we voted on tonight. So we discussed the interim administrator at Beck due to the resignation of Mr. Dawson, and we just voted to approve Bernie O'Connor as the interim principal for the upcoming year at Beck. We also discussed the extended school year program and recertification of funds due to additional costs for the teacher setup date, and that was on our agenda this evening under HR. And going forward, we will not see the not to exceed listed on the agenda to avoid having this come forward for $19,000 or whatever the amount is in the future. So we will not see that not to exceed. And then we also received an extremely brief update on the upcoming negotiations. Any questions? Thank you. Dr. Dickinson, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Judge. Mrs. Scarpolino, would you discuss P&L, please?
Certainly. We had our meeting on Tuesday, September 5th at 6 p.m. Normally it would be Monday, but because of the holiday, it was on Tuesday. Our old business was a second reading of the draft policy and regulation 5330.01, administration of medical marijuana. The changes that we had discussed before in the first meeting were added to the policy, specifically that the superintendent or his designee, in consultation with the school nurse and physician, would make the determination of whether or not approval for the administration of the medical marijuana on school grounds. So we wanted to clarify that language. There had been questions about what if the student is going on a field trip out of state to a state that does not allow medical marijuana. Would we transport the primary caregiver who would be in possession of the medical marijuana? And in consultation with our solicitor, it was determined that we would not do that. That is not something we would do as a district. The second item was the waiver of policy 2340 for field trips, which Rosa's 8th grade class is taking a trip to Washington, D.C. on June 6th and 7th, 2018, and they'll miss 2 days of school. So the committee agreed to move forward to go forward with the waiver so that they would miss those 2 days. The third item was the HIB grades, which was on the special action tonight, which we voted on. Mrs. Wethington reviewed the anti-bullying self-assessment summaries for each school. She did present the scores for both the 15-16 school year and the 16-17 school year, and she communicated that all the schools had met the requirements and met the required scores, so they met the necessary criteria. And basically, scores had to get 52 points to be considered meeting the criteria. And as you can see, it's even in the agenda, all of our schools were above the 52 points. And the scores will be posted on the schools' websites and on the district website also. Next, we had a resolution for the Week of Respect, which will be October 2nd through 6th of 2017, and resolution for the School Violence Awareness Week, which is October 16th through the 20th, 2017. And the resolutions for these weeks, which are mandated under the Anti-Bullying Bill of Rights and Administrative Code, would be put forth for the board action on September 26th. So it will be on our action agenda to show, and that's for us to formally show compliance. The new business was first reading of a revised policy, which is 5756, transgender students. It's a new legislation that we discussed a few months back, but this new legislation requires that school districts' transgender student policies ensure that there's language present that states that transgender students will be addressed in school by the name and pronoun preferred by the student that corresponds to the student's gender identity, regardless of whether there's a legal name change or a change in official school records has occurred. So the student identifies what gender and pronouns they would like used, and the schools will comply with that. Transgender students shall not be required to use restrooms or locker rooms that conflict with their gender identity. This was already part of our policy, but we just sort of clarified information, basically saying that if a building would provide alternative bathrooms if their gender-neutral bathroom was not available in that building. And that would be done in consultation for that individual school, which bathroom would be the best one to offer to a student. Additionally, we had an item for discussion on the open enrollment policy. During the summer, a parent had asked Dr. Campisi if we could do a lottery, could be used for situations when open enrollment students must be returned to their home schools due to lack of space. The open enrollment policy was discussed, and we went through hypothetical scenarios, but we agreed that the use of a lottery would just not be in the best interest of the students of the district. It creates more uncertainty, it delays their placement and their assignment. It can cause problems if we have later enrolled students who maybe come to the district halfway through the school year. It may inhibit their ability to go to their own home school if we've done this lottery before. So we just determined that for all our students, it would just not be the best policy, and we decided not to go any further with that. And also, we saw Dr. Campisi presented the Sports Emergency Management Plan. This was distributed to the committee for review. It's a comprehensive and consistent plan developed by the Director of Athletics and the Director of Security, so that all the schools, all the coaches are on the same page. This is an informational item, so it's not something that will require board action, but when it is finalized, it will be given to the board members for their information. There was no public, so there was no public comment, and I think that's it. Any questions? Dr. Dickinson, back to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Scarpolino. And last but not least, Mrs. Matlack, would you discuss strategic planning?
Thank you very much. Our first item, we had a construction and housing update from the township, and present at our meeting was Larissa Luciani, who is the Director of Planning for the Cherry Hill Township Department of Community Development. And she provided the committee with a comprehensive update of forecasted residential and commercial construction activity. Potentially, she estimates the district could gain 338 additional students from new housing in the township. However, there's a caveat to that many of these projects are in various stages of completion. Some are awaiting funding, and some have been in the making for almost 20 years and haven't come to fruition yet. So that 338 number is rather inflated. She did give us a sheet that we went through, and it was definitely less than 150. I think even less than 100 students projected from the ones that are finishing up now. So it's much less than that number she gave us. The committee asked her about the impact of additional commercial sites that could have on our already busy roadways and how it would affect our district busing. She stated that transportation studies are included in the application packets for these projects, and that generally it is felt that traffic would mostly be affected during the weekends and not during the typical school transportation times. She was alluding to the fact that recent construction is commercial, that has been recently brought to light has been commercial, and that she feels that that would add additional transportation on the weekends and after school hours, is her opinion. We had an update on the full-day kindergarten, which we have just thoroughly seen and discussed. And then Dr. Malash reviewed his first coffee and conversation meeting, which was at the Barton School, held on August 26th. And he held his second meeting at Cooper this past Saturday. And he has 6 additional community meetings that have been added to the schedule. Some are including Sunday afternoon dates, and these will be at the middle schools. And the input and questions from these meetings will be collected, and it's anticipated that the board will vote on the strategic plan, the Cherry Hill Public Schools 2020 strategic plan, and the referendum projects at the January 2018 board meeting. And although we had some members of the community in the audience, they had no questions for us. They asked clarifying question to the township about a construction project. Any questions, or Mrs. Judge?
Because I'm on strategic planning and I wasn't at strategic planning, can I take a picture of that handout? That
Yes, yeah,
okay.
I can make it, or you can take a picture of me.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And yeah, okay. And the second thing is regarding your coffee at Cooper. Was there a former board member present at your coffee at Cooper?
There was a former board member and a current board member, both present.
Too.
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right. I saw the former board member in the picture that was tweeted out. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you. Dr. Dickinson, back to you.
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. I will say that because Dr. Malash does not like me, he sent me some reading materials, including the study cited by the young lady from the township in who lives in New Jersey. And it did clearly state that in order for those numbers to apply, that the numbers have to be modified for local conditions, and they have to be updated. I believe the study was from 2006. Yeah. So those numbers are not as accurate as I think she portrayed them to be.
It was a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll move into our second public comment. You may now comment on any issue. When you come to the mic, please state your name and address. You will have 3 minutes for your remarks. Please note the green light will turn yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and a light will turn red when your 3 minutes are up. So, anybody have anything to share with us this evening?
Hi everyone, I'm Eleanor Stoffman, 4401 Sageboard Drive. I have a couple questions. So sad to see Bernie O'Connell leave East, but so happy for Beck. I have one grandson who's graduating East, and Mr. O'Connell would have been the senior advisor, so we're sad that that combination is not going to be there, but I have an 8th grader at Beck, so she'll be happy to have him there. What is the plan to replace the senior advisor at East? Do you have a person in mind already, or has it been filled? You know, do you know?
The position will be posted. Now that the position is being vacated, it'll be posted as another interim. There's lots of plans about what it'll look like, and as soon as that's finalized, it'll be announced.
Okay, and then for full-day kindergarten, of course, it's a passion of mine for more years than I can imagine, than I can even know how long I've been looking forward to something like that for our school district. So just for clarification, it seems to me that there really aren't options, because if we don't have an open building, a vacant open building to make a kindergarten center, and it doesn't seem feasible or possible to build a center, then that option obviously doesn't exist in the real world, even though it could be ideal. So then the other option, talking about having a kindergarten, full-day kindergarten in every school, which is always the ideal because it remains the neighborhood school for that child and siblings, then I don't see what your options really are, because if there is enough room in that school, then you have it. If there's not enough room, you either have to build the extra classrooms needed or use the modulars. So I guess cost is the factor. If building is out of the question, then it only leaves modulars. Or is building an extra room still a possibility? It's just not building a school the possibility. Because when you talked about construction not really being feasible. So would it be feasible to just build 1 or 2 classrooms onto a school? Would that be feasible if there's land connected to the school?
Yeah, so right now, honestly, Mr. Stoppman, everything is an option, right? Time, space, and money, are the big factors that go through. You heard me say earlier, my recommendation would be to do the full-day kindergarten in the neighborhood schools and make the accommodations that need to be made, in either within those buildings or to add on or whatever it would be, but to make each of the schools suitable to go through. Building a center could be an option. If somebody came in and, if the Ed Foundation decided they had $20 million they wanted to donate and, name the kindergarten center. Right, time, space, and money are the things to go through.
Okay, well, I have a red light. Okay.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? Okay. All right, well, good night, everybody. Thank you for coming out. Appreciate it. We have a motion to adjourn. Mrs. Judge and Mr. Goodwin. Thank you. Thank you all.